Dr. Nina Shapiro is the Director of Pediatric Otolaryngology and a Professor of Head and Neck Surgery at the Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. A graduate of Harvard Medical School and Cornell University, she completed her surgical residency at Harvard and finished additional subspecialty training in pediatric otolaryngology at the Great Ormond Street Hospital for Children in London and Children's Hospital of San Diego. When she has downtime between cases, you think she'd be scrolling or posting on social media where she's really active, but no, she spends that time writing, both articles for the lay media and books. She also has over 80 peer-reviewed publications and over 200 presentations. For perspective, I have 3. She is on the show today to talk about her book, Hype, A Doctor's Guide to Medical Myths, Exaggerated Claims, and Bad Advice, How to Tell What's Real and What's Not. We often hear pseudoscientific claims from our patients and even our colleagues, so we started with the incident that motivated her to write the book. Hype that she has fallen for, a recent diet fad that she thinks actually lives up to the hype. And we also talk about how she navigates conversations with patients when they bring up pseudoscience. She can be found on Twitter and Instagram at Dr. Nina Shapiro and visit her website, also drninashapiro.com.
Welcome to the Physician's Guide to Doctoring, a practical guide for practicing physicians. Dr. Bradley Block interviews experts in and out of medicine to find out everything we should have been learning while we were memorizing Krebs cycle. The ideas expressed on this podcast are those of the interviewer and interviewee and do not represent those of their respective employers. Those on this podcast accept no liability for the outcomes of medical decisions based on this information. As the radiologists like to say, clinical correlation is required. This is not medical advice, and this does not constitute a physician-patient relationship. If you have a medical problem, seek medical attention. And now, here's Dr. Bradley Block.
And now a word from this week's sponsor, Laurel Road.
Taking out med school loans had me watching every penny. I took 2 buses to get to campus. During my residency, I walked 20 blocks. But since I opened a Laurel Road linked checking account when I refinanced my loans, I got a crazy low rate plus a cash bonus. And all that extra money helped me finally buy my own car.
Where are we going?
Anywhere we want.
Laurel Road for Doctors. Banking, insights, and benefits uniquely designed for doctors. See laurelroad.com/doctorchecking for full terms and conditions. Laurel Road is a brand of KeyBank N.A. member FDIC.
Dr. Nina Shapiro, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
So great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So was there a straw that broke the camel's back, either when you were talking to patients or maybe even your colleagues, where you said, enough is enough. I've heard enough about this baloney. I need to write a book about it.
You know, there was, and a lot of people say, no, it was just something I was thinking about. But I will tell you, if you are thinking about writing a book, especially if you're in medicine, and even if you're not in medicine, it's an amazing process, but it is a long and arduous process. And it has to be done, I think, when it's not that you want to write a book, you feel like you have to write a book. And that's how it was for me. I really genuinely, and this is a true story, I felt like I had to write this book. And I do remember that aha moment. And again, I live and work in Los Angeles, which is the center of the world for woo and pseudoscience and a lot of made up wellness and medicine that really is just fake stuff. Surrounded by that. And I did think about writing a book based on just living and working here. But I remember the day, it was a week where a pediatrician called me and said, I have this 15-month-old patient and he's having some trouble breathing. He's coughing. He's been coughing for about a month. And when I took a listen to his chest today, he was wheezing on one side. And this is a very good pediatrician. And she said, you know, you don't have asthma on one side of your chest. And it didn't really seem like he had pneumonia. So she wanted to get a chest x-ray on the patient. And the family said, oh, we don't want our little baby, our untainted child, to be radiated with the chest x-ray. It's too interventional. It's too invasive. Finally convinced.
Well, wait till you hear about what happens next.
Exactly.
After the radiation.
That's the least of it. So finally, she convinced him to get an x-ray. It showed what we call air trapping, which means that there is a foreign object lodged in the patient's airways. It had probably been there for 4 to 6 weeks. And it turned out that he had been eating cashews about a month and a half prior and choked on a cashew. And remember, this is a 15-month-old. These kids are barely walking, let alone
cashews.
Eating solids with their 3-year-old brother, who also shouldn't have been eating cashews. So finally, she convinced them to see me, a surgeon, which just sounds terrible. I saw him in the office and I said, you know, guys, this kid needs a surgery yesterday, or actually 6 weeks ago. They didn't want to have surgery. And, it was really to convince them to come to the operating room because surgery was so interventional and so invasive. Can't you get it out another way? No, I can't. We can either do what's called a thoracotomy.
Through his feet? What other? Yeah, thoracotomy. That's the other way. Yeah, we can make.
Like slap them on the back.
When they hear surgery, they assume incisions. So sometimes that can be the scary part because, you're not. You're just reaching in. He won't let you if he's awake.
Exactly. That would be pretty tricky. And, we also think of surgery as the last resort. We're sort of, the end game to everything else that they've tried. And there's really nothing else you can do when it comes to a foreign object in a child's airway. So finally convinced him to have surgery. During the surgery, the kid had let's just say a very difficult time because his only one lung was functioning. The other lung was starting to fill up. So he had very little reserve and it was a very dicey intervention. All's well that ends well. The child is now, probably in first or second grade, doing great, probably still eating cashews. And, when we were all sort of sighing and stressed out and, we got the kid through it and he was in the ICU and, the anesthesia team was amazing, great surgery team, the whole 9 yards. I said to the parents, all is well, but we really need to talk about, the safety of and not safety of eating foods like nuts. That's all I said. He's 15 months and probably his 3-year-old too really shouldn't, they're too young to be eating nuts. And the family said, well, we're vegan and nuts are organic and have protein. So we're going to continue to do that. Thank you. And,
I will, hopefully I won't be on call the next time that this happens. So one of my colleagues can deal with one of these. Yeah, couldn't you compromise like cashew butter? Cashew butter.
I talked to them about nut butter and all that. Anyway, hopefully they understood because the kid was in the ICU for a day or two. He was quite sick. But the point was at that moment, I said, here's this family. They're educated. They're lovely. All they want is the best for their children. And, and they said it really with care and they weren't being dismissive of me and they weren't being, uncaring and the concern for their child, but they completely missed the boat on what is safe and healthy and what is dangerous. And that whole sort of mixed understanding of risk and danger and safety and health and well-being is completely turned upside down. And at that moment, I remember that afternoon, I said, that's it. This is going to be done. And it was.
So this is a patient-facing book, right? But still, I mean, there's a lot of important stuff for physicians as well. So when you were writing this book, I would imagine you ended up taking a different approach towards communicating with people like this, right? Communicating with people but that's not really pseudoscience, right? That wasn't, that's kind of hype, yes, because like you have this leaf of kale on the cover of your really very California and the vegan, right? But like we're put in situations with patients where they have these beliefs in pseudoscience, right? And for instance, ear pain, right? Kid gets recurring ear infections, right? You're a pediatric otolaryngologist, so you're going to be seeing a lot of this. And the parents come in and they've been giving their kid homeopathic eardrops. Now, they don't work for Gwyneth Paltrow's Goop, right? They're not like, but they're doing what they thought was the right thing. They're not like, taking their kids to naturopathic doctors. They're not that, let's just say it's a family. My kid's in pain, the drop said ear pain. How do you talk to them about that? Because I haven't found an effective way that doesn't make me sound like some hoity-toity, like, let me explain to you what homeopathy is, right? There's dilution and then there's nothing left of the actual substance. And right, I feel like I've lost them. So how do your conversations go? Right.
So as you said, if we start to sort of minimize what our patients are doing for their families, especially if they're well-meaning, we've lost them. If we say, what are you, crazy? Or what are you thinking? Or how would you possibly do that? Or who told you to do that? They're gone. They're done. What I try to do is a couple things. One thing that I learned from one of my very early mentors, we called him Monty, William Montgomery. He said, Nina, I always like to treat my patients like they're a neighbor. Not necessarily a friend neighbor, but just a neighbor. They're not family, they're not friends, but the way you would talk to a neighbor. So on that level. So it's more as if this is the problem over here, and we, the doctor and the family or the patient, are going to try to attack or address that problem, as opposed to I'm over here, you're over here, I'm right, you're wrong, let me tell you what to do. And so even if we know what we're doing and we know clearly that they don't know what they're doing, they have to be part of the conversation and part of the process. So if it's something that's useless, like something homeopathic in the ear, and they don't have, say, ear tubes or a perforation or having had ear surgery, it's not going to do anything bad. It's not going to do anything good, but it's certainly harmless. So I don't really dwell on things that are useless. If it's very, very costly to the family, then I'm a little more forthright of, wow, that's something that you really don't need to be spending $400 on for that one, little cc of golden drops that you've bought. So, if they have that, I'll, first of all, I'll say, well, how is it helping? And maybe it is. And maybe they don't really have otitis, and maybe they don't have anything. And the drops make them feel better. And then I can say, great, the ear is clear. I don't know if it was the drops that helped them. It probably wasn't, so just to sort of involve them in the process, as opposed to just, what? That's crazy, or that's just so wrong, because then they're gone. And we have a lot of families here and probably all over the country that have different ideas than what we would consider traditional. And we have to kind of go with it a little bit.
So I'll sometimes ask, do you know what homeopathy is? You bought homeopathic drops. And they'll say, no. And then I'll educate them, and it never works out. So what you're saying, from what you talk to patients about, is you don't even go there. You're like, did it help? Great. Could have been the drops, could have not, but you don't dwell on that one. Even though you wrote this book on hype, you have chosen not to fight that fight, because with all the information that you're giving the patient, that is not so important.
Right. I mean, I give them my recommendations. And if they say, well, the next time this happens, do you suggest that we use it again? Then I would say, well, the next time it happens, you should see your pediatrician, not me, because I don't want to see every kid with an earache. And see if there is. I
do. My practice is a bit different than yours.
Okay,
so
right. Yeah. But you can see them. And then if there's something actually going on, I'm happy to see your pain. But then I would say, well, maybe, we should evaluate it at the time to see if that is really the right direction to go. And then sometimes if families say, this is what I always do when my child has X, Y, or Z. And then what I oftentimes do, and it's really hard, it's a fine line, but if you do it in a way that's respectful, you can get a good conversation going. If a patient uses something, say homeopathy of any sort, whether it's an eardrop or a nasal spray, or, a so-called antibiotic that's not, then I'll say, well, I'm curious to see if you have any more information about that, or if there's been any data on that, depending on their interest level and their understanding of scientific research, as opposed to just saying it doesn't exist and it's nonsense. I try to engage them, and then I say, well, here's what I recommend, and here are the national guidelines from our national societies in our specialties, whether it's pediatric or ENT. Here's what we currently recommend, and here are the national guidelines. And sometimes if you say something like that, as opposed to, well, the study of 400,000 children over the last 4 million years showed this, that's, I think, less approachable than here's what we recommend. So a perfect example is, my child has fluid in their ears. It's not infected, but I want to clean it up with antibiotics. Which is commonly done. And we physicians are a lot at fault for giving this misinformation to families. And, so then I'll explain it to them. Well, here's what we're recommending right now, and here's why. And here's the potential harm for some of these other interventions.
So it sounds like mostly focusing on the positive. So rather than like saying like, this is why your thing didn't work, what you're saying is, this is what I recommend. This is the physiology. This is why it works. And then you go from this. So you're really spinning it on the positive rather than focusing on what they shouldn't do, unless what they're doing is harmful, right? Putting those drops in a kid with ear tubes could potentially cause some ototoxicity or at least middle ear inflammation. But if it's going to be harmless, then just leave it alone and then explain why your recommendation is the way to go. So focusing more on that.
I think so. And I think that keeps patients more understanding. I think they understand it more, and I think they are less sort of offended, because if you think about it, if I brought my car in and I know nothing about cars, and I said, well, I think it's this part here that's making the noise, and if the car guy says, you idiot, what are you thinking? This has nothing to do with that. I'm not going to go back to him, right?
It was making a noise, so I put oil in. Here's the oil. And they're like,
exactly.
You put the oil in the wrong part. That's ridiculous. That's not the wrong way. Yeah,
And I just take care of kids, and I have so many parents who are so anxious, and, they feel so terrible if they do something wrong for the most part. So for instance, I had a kid who, had some otorrhea, some ear drainage after tubes. And the parents, and this has happened, and I'm sure you've seen this too, they use either, a swimmer's ear drop or vinegar, and the kid hits, and I always tell them, you'll do that once, because the kid, your kid is going to scream and hit the ceiling. And then these parents call, and I'm like, you did not break them. You did not break your child. Don't worry. They're fixed. It's fine. You learned your lesson once. Don't do it again. And it's fine. Get over yourself. We make so many mistakes as parents, and the last thing they need is to, for us to beat them up more. So I've gotten a little softer, maybe, since the book is kind of rough in many ways. It's a little cynical, has a lot of sarcasm in it. It's meant for, the non-medical and the medical audience, because it covers a lot of areas. But just in my day-to-day, I try to give parents a little bit of slack these days. I don't know what came over me.
So how do you respond when a patient tells you something that their doctor recommended, right? And for you, like, you're getting referrals from other otolaryngologists, and you're getting referrals from family medicine, pediatrics. So if their trusted physician who they have a relationship with tells them something that is incorrect, and not just incorrect, but like based in pseudoscience, right? Like, oh, every time my kid gets sick, I give them vitamin C because Dr. So-and-so told me to, or I give them Zicam, or I give them, how do you approach that? Because there are two fronts here. There's the patient, and then there's the referring doctor. So how do you navigate that conversation without alienating both parties?
That is a little bit tricky. And as you know, we are, based on referrals from physicians and from, word of mouth and from families. Again, unless it's truly dangerous, and there are very few physicians out there who are really dangerous. If a physician is doing something like,
there's one running for Senate right now who's pretty dangerous, but that's a different.
That's a whole other podcast. Get him on your podcast.
Yeah. No thanks.
No, he who shall not be named. So, if it's something like, a lot of patients that I see, their pediatrician or primary care doctor gives them antibiotics for every cold. I think that's incorrect. I think that's not good medicine. And, in some ways more harmful than giving, 2,000 milligrams of vitamin C, which is going to do nothing, maybe give them kidney stones if they do it every day. Again, for that, unless I think it's really dangerous, I just tell them, well, here's what I recommend. And here's what a lot of people recommend. And here's the way, and here's what it's based on, and here's why. And then I would maybe give them some not soft data, but data in a way that's not like, well, a study showed this, but again, going back to guidelines, I feel like guidelines are our enemy and guidelines are our best friend because, for us as practitioners, we have to keep up with the changing guidelines, but it does give us a little bit of support when we're doing something that is potentially different from, say, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or even 2 years ago. So, if I have a patient who's having their tonsils out and the parents are pretty insistent on having antibiotics postoperatively, and then I can say, well, actually, the new recommendations based on a lot of years shows that antibiotics can actually do more harm than good. And once you say that, they'll usually go for it. But when it's another practitioner, and again, I live in a big city, as do you. Los Angeles is a big county, big city. There are 10 million people in Los Angeles County. If it's, and there a lot of doctors practice differently, I just tell them the way I do it and why. And I don't like to doctor bash. I think people know when they meet a different doctor and they have different philosophy or different way of practicing. And for many people, certainly people who have those options, they make their choice and they'll get different care wherever they go.
Is there anything that and I apologize, this is not exactly in the questions that I sent you beforehand, but is there something that you've seen in a lot of the community physicians that end up referring your patients? Like, this is your opportunity to give a mini talk on something that you would like to see them do a little bit differently. Maybe they're making some recommendations that you think, or telling their patients something that you think they should be doing just a little differently. This is your opportunity to talk to them.
I would say one of the things that concerns me, and I mentioned it already, is that these infants and toddlers with quote unquote sinusitis. We see a lot of that, even in Southern California, where the weather is beautiful every second. We see a lot of runny noses, stuffy noses. We didn't see it a lot during quarantine and COVID over the last 2 years, but we're seeing it again now with a vengeance. And these kids who have recurrent, really just bad colds, and sometimes even, viral bronchitis, they're on antibiotics every couple of weeks. And then what do you know? They stop responding to antibiotics when they never really did in the first place, or they got better while on antibiotics, but it wasn't really the antibiotic. It was just the 10 days of recovery. So, I wish that there were less use of antibiotics out in the community. It's, people come to the doctor, and I remember this even as an early intern and resident, that, in the ER, they always told us that when a person comes into the doctor's office, they want to leave with a parting gift. And that it usually is in the form of a prescription.
Not a birthday party. They don't get goodie bags. That's not how this works.
They want that little piece of paper. And we don't have samples anymore, so we have to give them the actual prescription. And I remember we started prescribing this really cool, powerful medication called ibuprofen. And people didn't know that name. And so they would go to their pharmacy and get this prescription filled for ibuprofen. We're going to give you a really high dose, 200 milligrams. Because people, wanted to leave with something. And now I think people want to leave with a prescription for an antibiotic. If they're going to take their child out of school, bring them to the doctor's office, they don't want to leave knowing that they're sick and they just have to get better. And it's just going to be a matter of time. And I try to really do that with a lot of patients, is flip it into, if I'm not going to give them anything, I'm not going to recommend surgery, I'm not going to recommend a medication, I'm really not going to recommend anything. And then they feel like, well, then what's the point? And I'll say, well, here's the good news. You don't need a surgery. You don't need medication. You just need time or X, Y, or Z. So to give them that, at least, because they want something when they go to the doctor. I give them my business card and a sticker.
If you're wondering just how to diagnose a sinus infection in a kid, you can listen to a couple of episodes ago, I had another pediatric otolaryngologist on from the Backtable ENT podcast,
Oh,
and we talked about how you can. Yes, you were on their podcast as well.
I love them.
Yes, so we talked about how to diagnose a sinus infection in kids. So if you want to learn how to do that accurately, to make sure you're not overprescribing, it is a hard thing to do, and you can't get it right. Hard to do it right, even when we're doing nasal endoscopies, it's hard to get it right all the time. But yeah, listen to that episode. Okay. So when you're talking to, so we haven't really gotten much into hype, right? So far in this in this episode. So when you do have, let's say, like an opportunity to talk to medical students, and you want to educate them on some of the topics that you've covered in your book. What is it that you don't have them for much time, right? They're rotating through, they spend a day with you. If you want to give them a little nugget or two, what is it that you choose to pass on to them?
I think that for students and also for residents and even other physicians, what I try to talk to them about, again, is meeting their patients where they are, because even if you hear some crazy stuff that patients are doing, you don't want to alienate them, and you want to educate them. So how do we do that in a way that's approachable? Things to look out for, sort of buzzwords are belief systems. That I don't like that term. Do you, when a patient asks me, and I really try to, I take a breath when they say that, do you believe in vaccines? And this was well before COVID. They don't really ask me anymore because they know how I feel at this point. But, do you believe in vaccines, as if it's the Easter Bunny or Santa Claus? So for that, then I become a little clearer and a little more forceful. And I say, it's not a belief. This is the reality. This is how vaccines work. This is what they do. This is how they protect you. This is how they protect the community. Again, and this has nothing to do with COVID. This is all well before COVID. So vaccines are a biggie, and vaccines are a biggie certainly in California, mostly in Los Angeles, where there are a lot of families who are, what we call anti-vax. Anti-vax has been around as long as vaccines have been around. So, that's a big
crazy
topic.
Political juxtaposition of where the far left and the far right end up meeting, right? Because now the far right don't believe in the vaccine, and the far left was already. I think Marin County is one of the least vaccinated counties because, of what you said, right? They just, I don't want to put something foreign into my body. It's got toxins in it. And I just found that really interesting how these two, they couldn't be further apart in their belief systems. And yet they agree in this. Yeah.
Well, they flipped. So the state with the highest childhood vaccine rate is Mississippi. Right. And it's one of the low, I think it's 15% of the state is vaccinated against COVID, but 95+% of children are vaccinated. And, a place like Marin County is 95+% are vaccinated against COVID, but it has one of the lowest childhood vaccine rates in the country. Yeah. It's 180.
That's so bonkers.
Completely opposite political beliefs. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting.
So one of the things that you talk about in your book is the curse of the original belief. Right. The curse of the original belief is that once you've bought into something, it's hard to change your mind ultimately. Right. Because I think the reason is because we believe that we're good decision makers. So it was the right thing to do to vote for Donald Trump. Right. I'm not going to get too political on this, but it's too late. I already have. It was the right thing to do. So now, because I'm a person that makes good decisions, I'm going to continue to support a lot of what he does because I make good decisions and my decision was to vote for him. So it's the same idea behind the curse of the original belief. I have been doing this thing in my practice for a really long time. So it's going to be hard for me to admit that hasn't been the right thing to do. So is there a curse of the original belief that was particularly difficult for you to let go of?
There was. And, it's a really interesting phenomenon. And it's sort of the idea, Donald Trump, for instance, that if you believe that you voted for Donald Trump for the good reasons and the right reasons, and anything he does that is not something, that deep down in your heart now is not the right thing, your original belief system will convince yourself that, well, it's actually okay because. So even though he's doing these terrible things or doing something that I know is not something I believe in, because I voted for him, I sort of owe it to myself that my belief owns me, and I have to stick with that. For us in medicine, if you think about how we practice now in 2022, or how we practiced in 2020, or how we practiced in 1992, it's one of the greatest things about being in medicine is that it does change. And that, what you learned as a resident and an intern and a medical student is very different from what you're doing now. And what you're doing now is going to be different from what you're going to do 10 or 15 years from now. And for many of us, especially surgeons, that's a hard thing to do. It's hard to change. And most people who make big changes remember the day that they made that change. I remember the day when I didn't ask the anesthesiologist for 25 milligrams per kilogram of ampicillin at the start of a tonsillectomy. And it wasn't too long ago. I won't tell you when, but it should have been a long time ago. It wasn't that long ago. And everyone looked at me like, what? And I said, yes, I'm an antibiotic steward, and I'm going to fight antibiotic resistance starting this moment. And it was hard. And then all's well that ends well. And then it just and then it becomes incorporated. So it's a little thing, but that was a big thing for me. It's the most common surgery I do. So it was, the whole room kind of fell into silence when I said that.
Is there any other hype that you think maybe not in the operating room, maybe in your life that you've
I see a lot of hype.
And then that you yourself, and then you had to, change your view. You know what? I'm going to stop taking. I just go back to vitamin C. I'm going to stop taking vitamin C every
day. Well, here's the thing. I do things that I know are hype, and I still do them because I believe that the placebo effect works. And I feel that if I do something, for instance, take a daily vitamin C or take a multivitamin.
You do.
Sometimes.
Okay.
Only in the winter.
Okay. In the California winter. Okay.
Only on Tuesdays. If I take something that I know is really, I'm going to be fine either way, but I psychologically feel better. I feel like I have a little more control of my morning if I take a multivitamin, purely because it's part of my routine. I think there's some benefit to that. And families ask me that, like, doctor, what do you think about multivitamins? Or what do you think about vitamins? And I do this in talks. I have an audience, and I'll raise your hand if you take more than 7 supplements a day. And then I go, 7, 6, 5, 4. And people do, there are people out there who are taking 7, 8, 9 supplements per day, or, these hyper vitamins or these super, charged vitamins and these so-called superfoods. As long as it's not dangerous, and as long as they don't mind wasting, and I mean wasting their money, then by all means, if it makes them feel better, go ahead. There's no physiologic benefit to it except up here in your head. And if that's enough, then do it. And that's okay.
And we do have an episode on the placebo effect, actually, on someone who researches the placebo effect. So for the listeners, if you want to hear about that, it was a couple of months ago. So is there anything that you've encountered that seems like hype, but then when you looked into it, it turns out it isn't hype? Like, I don't know, intermittent fasting or cold showers and Wim Hof or toothpaste, right? Anything that seemed like hype, but turns out isn't.
So intermittent fasting, there's true. So cold shower, I don't care how good cold showers are for you. I don't care those ice baths. I see doctors sitting in a steam bath and then jumping in. I don't care. That's crazy. I feel, my heart starts racing when I see that. So maybe it's good, but I don't even want to know.
We just opened the pool. So I do it once a year when we open the pool.
Then why? Yeah. You feel better. You feel better because it's going to be summer soon, right? And
no, because my kids peer pressure me and my wife peer pressures me into doing it. They're like, right. And then they jump in. And so it's
and then it's fun.
That's fun. Yeah, I think actually for that, it's more like, you prove to yourself that you can do hard things. So it's not
Right,
necessarily the
that's fine.
physiology of it, but
Right.
like I take cold showers suck, but I can get myself to do it.
Right.
If I can get myself to do that, I can get myself to this. So I think psychologically, but so you're going towards intermittent fasting. There's some
physiology to that. And first of all, when I first heard of that, I said, well, I do intermittent fasting every day and I break it. It's called break fast. And that's at usually 6 o'clock in the morning before I go to work. But there is some physiology to extending that period of time and it depends on your age and your health status. There's so much to it. But say if you normally, finish dinner at 7 at night and you wake up and you have breakfast at 7 in the morning, and then you extend that to say, instead of your first eating at, 7, instead you eat at 10 in the morning or 11 in the morning as your first meal, it will change your metabolism and potentially help you lose weight or feel better. So from the basic, pure physiologic standpoint, there is something to intermittent fasting. That said, I remember last January or whenever the first vaccines came out, and I was a vaccinator, volunteer during that first month when we were rolling out vaccines, and we were outside and sticking, needles in people's arms, and while they were driving in cars, and I was working with a doctor alongside me, and it was about 11 in the morning, and he said, I need to go get a cookie. I said, okay, go get a cookie. And he said, because I haven't eaten today. And I said, well, then definitely go get a cookie. And he said, I'm doing intermittent fasting and I haven't eaten in whatever, 18 hours or something like that. And I thought, well, that just sounds terrible. First of all, you're starving. Second of all, like you're eating a cookie, and it wasn't even like
break your fast,
a healthy cookie. Like you're just eating crap, if I can say that on your podcast. Yeah. Eat something healthy if you're going to do that to yourself or for yourself. So, then I thought, well, there's more hype to reality in this intermittent fasting because people make their own rules, which is fine. But, if I'm going to be doing something for health reasons and, I'm starving and I'm going to eat a cookie, chances are I'm going to eat another cookie 10 minutes later. And it's certainly not going to help my health or my weight loss or anything like that. But from a basic physiology standpoint, if you do wait to eat, there is some health benefit to it. But I'm not recommending it necessarily for everybody.
Yeah. It's funny. I find diet to be like religion. People have these strong beliefs, but at the same time, like how we keep kosher in my house, like we just keep kosher in the house and the backyard, but like we can eat bacon and shellfish at a restaurant, and we can mix milk with poultry so we've chosen to like,
your own
so
rules.
we've got this like belief
Yeah.
that this is the right thing for us to do. But we're going to give a little here and we're going to over there. And I think diet's the same thing, but also in the same way that people are so strong about their convictions with it. Like, this is the right way and everything else is the wrong way. And it's and I think that gets to some of the hype. Like it ends up you getting so fired up about how vital it is. And ultimately, like, you're right. It works for some people. There's some physiology behind it, but ultimately,
right. And a lot of this stuff is just not sustainable. If you're, people do it for a period of time and then, oops, one day they wake up and they're hungry and they eat and then it's over. And that's fine too. And just like keeping kosher or, any sort of dietary restriction, unless there's a medical indication for it, if you really have, celiac disease and you can't have gluten or makes you really sick. Or, if you keep, kosher, for instance, but you live in a community where it's really hard to keep kosher because your kids' friends and colleagues, and then they start going to birthday parties and you're going out to restaurants where there's not good, sometimes it's not sustainable. And then people make their own rules, which is fine. But it does become, a bit of a battleground. I find it very interesting. And whenever I talk about diet, and I always say, well, everything in moderation, people feel like that's a big cop out, but it's the reality. Unless you have a medical indication or a very, very strong religious conviction that I respect and appreciate. Other than that, there is no evil food and there is no perfect food. There's no perfect diet and there's no one terrible diet. And people don't like to hear that because they want sort of, well, what's the magic pill? What's the answer? And to say, a little of this, a little of that. It's not so exciting.
One of my first podcast interviews with Stephanie Sogg, who we had back recently, we talk about weight and how to talk to our patients about weight, how to have an effective conversation. And what she says is, food is not bad unless it's poisonous, it tastes bad, or it's gone bad. And then don't eat it. Right. If it's any of those three things, don't eat it. If everything else, it's not bad, and go ahead and eat it.
Right. But, yeah. But people don't like to hear that. They want that prescription. It's like that piece of paper, tell me the diet. What's the best diet? What's the secret sauce or not secret sauce to make me, the perfect being that I am meant to be. And it's a little frustrating.
Yeah. And whatever, like you said, it needs to be sustainable, right? Even if you give them this magic bullet, thing that they have to do, if it's going to totally turn their world upside down, then it's ultimately not going to work. It's not sustainable. They can't do it. So it even doesn't matter what that thing is if it's not sustainable. And if it's not, and it's going to be something that's so small that it is going to be sustainable, what kind of difference is it going to make? Because it's so small. So it's a bit of a paradox. They're looking for something that they're ultimately not going to be able to do. Right.
Very popular here still are juice cleanses. I don't know if that's all around the country, but whether it's a colonic cleanse or just, a quote unquote juice cleanse, people genuinely feel like that rids them of all the evil humors in their body and probably the world. And I find that one very, very entertaining.
My wife does that sometimes. She'll go on, I'm going to kickstart it with a cleanse. I'm like, okay.
Go ahead.
But right. Like back to what you were saying with the homeopathy eardrops, like the conversation that I have with you it's like, great. Okay, go ahead. As long as what you're doing isn't dangerous.
That's fine. That's fine.
Yeah. So you also mentioned colonics. So the last thing I want to ask about is coffee, right? The hype around coffee, because I feel like every other day there's a study coming out that talks about the health benefits of coffee. And I think that's because as a profession, we are all dependent on coffee. And so we're going to seek out studies that justify our dependence on coffee. So what do you think? Coffee hype? And if you are drinking coffee, do you drink it orally or the colonic route? Do you just, put it right through your sigmoid colon?
There you go. So yes, I don't care what they say about coffee. I'm going to keep drinking coffee. And, I guess you can say the same thing about wine. Maybe we like wine too, because there are a lot of wine studies too. I think with every coffee study, there's a red wine study. I think, again, this is so boring that coffee is actually good for you in moderation. I think the coffee studies now are more about whether it should be 1 cup, 1.5 cups. What do you mean by a cup? My cup is 20 ounces. Is that a cup, or should it be 2 cups or 3 cups? I think that's really, we know coffee is good for you. We know that too much coffee is bad for you. It's pretty simple. Will it be associated with longer life? Well, people who drink coffee regularly are probably drinking coffee because they're getting up and going to work. And going to work is associated with longer life and using your brain and using your muscles and using your body and using socialization. So it's for a study like that, especially when it's a diet issue, and I consider coffee part of your diet, or wine, which is part of your diet, it's too complex. I really think, even though they tease this stuff apart, most people who are drinking coffee on a regular basis are drinking it because they like it, and they're also drinking it because they need it. And it is an addictive drug, which is fine. It's a pretty safe addictive drug. And it's good for you in moderation. It's pretty simple. If you drink 5 or 6 cups of coffee every morning, it's not good for you. It's going to cause problems with your heart rate and your blood pressure, and you're going to have to pee all the time. And if you're a surgeon, that's really not a good arrangement. So I think there will continue to be coffee studies. And I agree. I think doctors do it because we like coffee. There is a podcast, Explore This Space. And the host, Mark Shapiro, who's not related to me, but is wonderful, has a whole like coffee thing going on Med Twitter, if you want to check it out. Much, much, much more advanced than I can ever talk about coffee.
Interesting.
Yeah.
We'll have to check it out. Well, yeah. Dr. Nina Shapiro, author of Hype, A Doctor's Guide to Medical Myths, Exaggerated Claims and Bad Advice, How to Tell What's Real and What's Not. How do we find you online, and how do we find your other books as well? Because that Hype is not even your most recent book. You just put out another book. So actually briefly tell us about that.
Sure. So thanks. So first of all, you can find me online on Twitter at Dr. Nina Shapiro, on Instagram at Dr. Nina Shapiro. My website is drninashapiro.com. Amazon, obviously, is the behemoth that carries all of my books. My most recent book is called The Ultimate Kid's Guide to Being Super Healthy. It is written for the audience of elementary school children and maybe early middle school children. And it is written to acknowledge them and empower them to understand what's going on with their health and with the world around them. And probably most importantly, why we grown-ups are making them do all the things that we make them do.
Well, sounds perfect for my kids. I've got one about to start kindergarten and one about to start first grade. So I will definitely and have to have you back on to talk about it.
Yeah.
Dr. Nina Shapiro, thanks so much for your time.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Brad.
That was Dr. Bradley Block at the Physician's Guide to Doctoring. He can be found at physiciansguidetodoctoring.com or wherever you get your podcasts. If you have a question for a previous guest or have an idea for a future episode, send a comment on the webpage. Also, please be sure to leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform. We'll see you next time on the Physician's Guide to Doctoring.